Law Firm Finances Simplified, Episode 14. Are you ready to make your law firm a profit-generating machine that will free up your time and skyrocket your impact? With more than 2 decades of business growth experience and having proven that you can be successful while prioritizing your family and your impact, introducing the Profit with Law podcast. I am your host, the creator of the Firm Differentiator 10X Effect, Moshe Amsel. Well, hello and welcome to another episode of Profit with Law. I am your host, Moshe Amsel. And on this episode, I wanted to dig into the topic of your law firm finances. I titled the episode Law Firm Finances Simplified because certain people, when they start to think about money and they hear the word finances, their head starts to spin. And some people are really good with this topic, but many people struggle with it. And the purpose of this episode is really to lay the foundation for the next couple of episodes that I'm going to be releasing over the next 2 weeks. One talking about debt, another talking about cash flow. But my goal today is really just to very generally try to help you understand what is important to look at when it comes to your law firm's finances and where should you be looking for that. So the first thing is let's just tee up the conversation. Let's talk about why is this important and where does it come up? Where does it rear its ugly head? So I've had a number of businesses come to me. Law firms are a very big culprit in this one. And they come to me at the end of the year or maybe after a few years, and they have a massive tax bill to the IRS or to their state or a combination of the two. How does that happen? How do you end up owing a lot of taxes and digging this hole that seemingly is almost impossible to get out of and seems to get worse year after year? Another example is we tend to choose a revenue goal, right? We tend to choose a top line number that we want our firm to achieve. So whether that number be 100,000, 500,000, 10 million, whatever that number is, there is a number. If you're doing something right, you're aiming towards a number. Whether you have a plan for it or not doesn't matter. The reality is that we aim for a number. And how many of you aim for a number that you take home from the firm? Or is it just that top line number that we're looking at? And we'll go into how irrelevant that top line number is in just a few moments. But why is that number so important? Isn't the reason you're running the firm to bring home income to yourself, for your family, for you to be able to live freely and spend time on hobbies or charities or spend time with your family, right? So the money has a lot of power, but are you bringing that money home? And if not, then what relevance is that top line number? And why aren't you bringing that money home? Where is it going? Then we can get into more detailed things like, should you spend money on a marketing effort? Should you spend money on hiring staff? Should you spend money on, this is not something you think about spending money, but should you spend money on contingency cases, right? So should you take on a case contingency basis, which means that you're putting in a lot of time with a hopeful eventual payout. And obviously you're taking on the risk that if there is no payout, you get nothing, which is a pretty big risk to take. And at the same time, you're also taking on the risk of the fact that you need to carry this particular client until that money is paid out, right? So we don't think about that, but the timing of money is really important in running a business. And we call that cash flow, and we're going to spend some time talking about cash flow. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about how to fix it when we delve into that episode coming up in the next couple of weeks. So when it comes to the finances of our firm, there's a lot of basic questions that need to be answered and can be answered by simply understanding some of the basics of how this works. So the first thing to understand is some of the terminology so that when I'm talking to you, it doesn't sound like French. So first of all, in my language, in accounting speak, revenue is the amount of money that you generate before any expenses. So I go out, I obtain a client, regardless of how I obtain them, whether I paid for ads, whether I need to pay a finder's fee to somebody, whether I have a salesman who needs to receive a commission. The money that I receive for my services from that client, that is my revenue number. And that can easily be measured by deposits into the bank, right? Wherever those deposits are coming from. And that revenue number by itself, although it's something that we can brag about, it's actually a meaningless number. And I'll demonstrate that to you right now. So let's say I bring in $1 million into my firm in 1 year. And in that same year, I spend $2 million on staff, marketing, office space, and so on. What is the net result of my efforts for the year? What did that $1 million get me? It got me $1 million loss because I spent $2 million, right? So the top line number taken by itself, I walk around and say, hey, I've got $1 million revenue firm. I got $1 million law firm. But the reality is what you have is a speedboat of losses, right? You're just losing money faster than everyone else. So the revenue number taken by itself is meaningless, and it's also misleading because it hides the reality of your business. It actually means nothing about your business. It means that you have figured out how to generate clients. It could be that it costs you so much to bring those clients in that you simply can't service them. It could be that you receive so little for what they're paying for that it's so expensive to service them in relation to what they're paying. So it could be you're undercharging. It could be that you're paying too much for your leads. It could be you're paying your staff too much. It could be you're paying too much rent. It could be you have too much office space. It could be you don't need any office space. There's so many variables that could be, but the point is that revenue alone is really a meaningless number. So what is a number that we should be looking at? So if you take your revenue and you subtract your expenses, so let's say we spend money on rent, we spend money on staff, we spend money on marketing, we spend money on other services. So maybe we have a reception service, maybe we have software that we're paying monthly fees for. You take your top line revenue, you subtract all of those expenses, that gives you a bottom line number. So first of all, revenue is that top number. Then expenses are all the things we're subtracting off of that. And whatever is left, if it's a positive number, is our net income or profit. So you might have heard a term called a P&L. P&L stands for profit and loss, and it's just another name for something called the income statement. So if we were to go into your bookkeeping software and we were to run a report called a profit and loss or an income statement for a period of time, it would print out the categories of accounts that you have, revenue on top, then it has expenses, and it's nets the two. It subtracts the expenses from the revenue, and it provides that bottom line number called net income. And net income is how much your firm earned in the course of doing business. Now, it is further complicated by the fact that it depends on how you, as an owner who is actively working in the business, how are you getting paid? How are you getting paid? Are you getting paid on payroll? where you get a paycheck and the taxes that you pay are taken out of that paycheck, or are you just taking distributions from the firm? And that is a question for your accountant, your tax accountant. Okay, so I'm not delving into that topic at all today, but the reason I'm asking is because that net income number that lists all the expenses above it, if you're taking distributions as your salary, that is not included in there. Let's just use some examples. Let's say that your firm did $300,000 of revenue over the course of the last 12 months. And let's say that your expenses were $250,000 over the last 12 months. Your net income is $50,000. Now, if you were not taking home a paycheck, then the total amount that you bring home from the business is $50,000. If you were taking home a paycheck, then that salary would have already been included on that profit and loss statement. It would have already been netted out as an expense. And then the $50,000 you're left with would be additional money that comes home to you after your payroll that you're taking. So that's why that's important, because you need to understand when you're looking at that statement, when you print that out and you take a look at that report and you want to understand how is my business doing, you need to understand what is included in my expenses. What is actually reducing that top line number to tell me how my business is faring. Now, let's add one more piece to the puzzle and let's talk about taxes. So you netted $50,000 from your firm. However, probably 30 to 40% of that is going towards taxes. So 15.3% is your self-employment tax right off the bat, unless, depending on the structure of the business. So if you're on payroll, then that tax is being paid on the payroll side, and then anything above and beyond your reasonable compensation salary that you're taking home is not subject to self-employment tax. But if you are not, and you're paying yourself with distributions directly from a pass-through entity, then you're responsible for that 15.3% self-employment tax, plus your income tax, which depends on your total income and if you're married, your spouse's total income. Everything combined then sets your tax bracket, and that determines what your tax rate is. But let's say the lowest rate other than 0% is 10%, right? So let's say that you are at the lowest rate, you're already at 25% with just your 15.3 plus your 10%. Then if you live in a tax state, your state income tax could be anywhere from 0 to 8 or 9%, depending on where you live. So let's say it's another 5%. So we're at easily 30% of that net income is going to taxes. So let's say that number is 30% for this example. You're taking home $50,000, but you're going to have a tax bill of $15,000 out of that $50,000, which means that you really only taken home $35,000. Now, that may be good if it's your first year in business, but if you're running a firm year after year and that's all you're bringing home, then we've got problems, right? So it might look really good that you're a solo, you just have a small staff, and you're bringing home, you're bringing into the firm $250,000, $300,000 a year, which sounds like a lot, but when you do the numbers, when you turn around and you do the math, you might not be taking home a lot of money. Now, maybe your expenses are not that high. Maybe your firm is very healthy at $300,000. That's very possible. But the first place that you need to look is at your income statement to see how you're doing. So that's not something left for your accountant to run at tax time. That is something that you should be running once or twice a month to really get a handle on how your firm is doing. Now, you cannot operate your firm by looking at the cash balance in your bank account. And this may be obvious to you, or it may not. But I will tell you that most business owners wake up in the morning, and one of the first things that they do is log into their bank account and check the bank balance, both personal and business. It's simply human nature to do that. And what happens is that when there is a large number in that bank account, we have a tendency to look at that number and say, wow, I'm doing pretty good. I've got a lot of money, a lot of cash in my bank account. And what that does is it makes us very susceptible to making spending decisions that we wouldn't make otherwise. If you woke up in the morning and your firm's bank account balance was $0, most likely anything that crossed your desk, any question about spending money that's not already spent, the answer would be no. Because you would find a way to do without it. You'd find a way to manage without it. Now, I'm not here to preach about your spending habits, not today. I'm not here to tell you that you shouldn't be spending money on your firm. I'm not even here to tell you that if you don't have the money, you shouldn't be spending money on your firm. What I am trying to highlight is that there is a direct correlation between human tendencies and the way that we act in operating our business. And we need to start to recognize those. We need to start understanding those, because this is the foundation of the entire episode we're going to do on the cash flow in your firm. And it all starts with understanding that when you check your cash balance in the morning and you see how much money you have, it has a direct effect on how you operate in your business that day. And the reason that you can't just check your balance in the morning and make decisions based on that is because by looking at your balance, you haven't considered bills that haven't come due yet, that are coming due. You haven't considered checks that have already been written, that are outstanding, that are going to get cashed at some point, and that money is already earmarked for those. You haven't considered the tax bill that you haven't paid yet. You likely haven't even considered taking money home for yourself. And all of these considerations, all of these things that you need to consider, it's very hard to do by just looking at one single number in the bank account. So how do we do that, right? How do we check to see what's going on? Well, there's another report, another tool that's available in your bookkeeping software, and that is the cash flow statement. So there's two different tools that you can use for this. One is the cash flow statement, and the other is to run your income report on what's called an accrual basis. And an accrual basis would require a couple of things. Number one, it would require that your bills are being entered into the system before they are due, so that those bills get recognized, those expenses get recognized even though they haven't been paid yet. And it would also, it just means, first of all, you also need to understand what is accrual versus cash. And I don't want to go down a rabbit hole with this, but basically the accrual basis of accounting tries to match expenses to the revenue generated. So when you send your client a bill, even if they haven't paid it yet, it's recognized as income. And when you enter a bill that you owe somebody, you owe a vendor, it's recognized as an expense the date that that bill was created, or the date that that bill was incurred. So it does a really good job of matching your revenue to expenses, and therefore gives you a much better picture on how your firm is doing. However, it has no correlation to the bank balance in your bank account, because you can bill $1 million to your client base, but if only 10% of them pay their bill, you only generated $100,000. Yet on paper, it looks like you made $1 million, right? So, or generated $1 million. So that's a very dangerous way to look at it. So the cash flow statement is really a good place to look to really see where is the cash going and what is the flow of cash. But understand that the taxes you pay as an owner are not going to be anywhere in your bookkeeping. Okay, it's not going to show up on there at all. That's something that you need to, after net income math, you have to do that math after you arrive at your net income. You can't assume that all that money is coming home. That would be a poor assumption. So I wanted to touch on just a couple other things. So one is, we just mentioned that if you generate an invoice to somebody and they receive that invoice for services incurred, but they haven't paid it yet, right? So you technically have earned that money. They have an IOU, but there's no guarantee that they're going to pay it until the cash is received, right? So what that does when you bill somebody and they haven't paid it yet is it creates something called an accounts receivable. Accounts receivable simply means that you have accounts that you are still expecting to receive payment on. Now, your accounts receivable can go on for a number of months. So basically, you can have some people who pay very quickly and then some people who take their time paying, even if you have terms on it. So even if you say net 30, so it's due in 30 days, or net 60, it's due in 60 days, some people might delay that, might pay you in 60, 90, 120 days. And the longer that cycle gets, the harder it is for you to do business, because you need cash to pay your bills, right? Your vendors want to get paid on 30 days or cash on delivery, or something in between, 15 days or 45 days. But if you need to pay your vendors, your expenses on time, and your clients are not paying you on time, that creates a gap. And the bigger that gap gets, the harder it becomes to run your firm. So even if your firm on paper is doing really, really well, and you're doing $1 million of revenue, and you have $800,000 in expenses, if you have your accounts receivable taking 120 days to collect, guess what? You're running a negative cash flow every month. And that negative cash flow is going to hurt unless you have a way to work around it. So either you have to borrow money, you have to cut expenses, or you have to figure out a way to collect that money faster. So understanding your accounts receivable and understanding how bad it is, or how much it is extremely crucial to your operation of your business. And that's one of the integral components of the financial piece of your business. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is contingency cases. And contingency is going to come up again and again. We're going to do an episode on debt. We're going to talk about contingency there. But basically, when you start out and you're a brand new lawyer and you're looking for your first case, you have no problem taking that case contingency. Why? Why would that not be a problem? It's very simple. You have no overhead. You have no expenses. You have no employees. So all it's costing you is your time. So if you can get your full hourly rate that you would like to charge because somebody is willing to use you because they don't have to shell anything out of pocket, and you believe that you can win this case, then the only thing you're sacrificing is your time. And it's in a way, when we're first, it's always this way. Shouldn't be, but it's always this way. But especially when we're first starting out, it feels like it's easier to sacrifice our time than anything else, right? Because our time it's just an asset that it's expiring anyway, right? We're using 168 hours every week. So what's the difference if I spend 30 of them working on this client's case, trying to get them a win in the contingency department? But what happens is that as we start to grow our firm and as we start to get serious about our firm's business, we bring on staff and we rent an office space and we pay for software. And all of those expenses need to be paid. We have to pay payroll every 2 weeks or once a month or every week, depending on how your payroll cycle is set up. We have to pay payroll whether or not we won that contingency case. So if you're banking your entire firm on the outcome of contingency, you're doing two things, right? Thing number one is you are gambling on your ability to survive, right? So if you lose the contingency case, you're likely going to go out of business because you're going to use any cash reserves that you have, any access to credit that you have on paying your payroll and all your other expenses while you're waiting for this case to complete. And cases can drag on. We all know that. It could have been a slam dunk, and somehow it's 2 years later and it's still not over. And you're still carrying this thing around like a boat anchor behind you, right? So one risk is the risk of failure and the risk of destroying your firm in the process. The second risk is just the risk of the cost of money, the cost of carrying these contingency cases. So think of that accounts receivable that we just talked about. Well, let's say that this contingency case is going to net you $100,000 of revenue as your percentage of the total payout, right? That's what you're hoping for. And let's say it's going to take you a year to do that. So over the course of that year, a lot of effort goes into earning that money. So whether the math even works when you're comparing it to just straight out billing a client is a whole nother question. But you now need to go for 12 months without that $100,000, which means that either, and let's say that your expenses for running a firm for $100,000 for the year, let's say your expenses are $50,000, or let's say even less. Let's say it's $30,000. So that means that every month we have to come up with $2,500 in expenses without any income coming in for this contingency case. And you got to do that for every month for 12 months until you get that payout. So that works really nicely when it's just you, but when you have to pay payroll for 12 months for people who are spending time on these cases and you're not getting paid for them, there has to be another answer, right? There has to be something that cash is drawing from. So it's either drawing from cash that you already have in the bank for the firm, or it's drawing on a line of credit, or you're borrowing from your personal savings or your retirement account just to get the firm to survive. And it feels like you're constantly struggling to make payroll. It feels like you're drowning, but everyone's busy. So I can go on and on for contingency cases. It's a pet peeve of mine. I do think that they're great, but I think that they need to be done in the right way. And we can't forget or disregard the financial piece of it, the drain on cash that we have, or the need for additional cash in order to make it work once we start to grow our firm. So if you're a solo and you're thinking about expanding and going beyond yourself, you need to have some really, really good number crunching sessions to figure out how much contingency you can handle. And if your business is run completely on contingency, then you got to go back to the drawing board because you're not going to survive. I've seen firms close their doors because they just didn't see it coming. They knew that they could win these cases. However, they didn't have the runway. They didn't have enough cash to see the cases through. So anyway, I didn't want to turn this episode into talking about contingency, but I do want to focus on the fact that it's important to understand your numbers. It's important to understand your finances. Now, once you understand the big picture of finances, we could go deep, right? We could start looking at what is the production that I need to generate from associates that I hire, right? How much work do they need to do? How do I measure that? How do I know that the work that they're doing for the firm is profitable? How do I measure, whether the paralegals are earning their keep? How do I measure whether any employee is worth having and earning their keep? And where do we draw the line? Like, how crazy do we make ourselves in measuring these things? So units of measure are really important. And I'm sure we'll spend an episode talking about things like KPIs, key performance indicators, when we're trying to look at how we're doing and see what that looks like. But at the end of the day, you need to understand the basics. And this comes around to, if you're listening to this and I keep referencing bookkeeping software and you're like, I'm not using bookkeeping software. I got everything in an Excel spreadsheet. You can't run a business off an Excel spreadsheet. Some people would argue that you could, and the reality is that you technically can, but you can't, because anybody who's listening to this that's using a spreadsheet is not using it to the extent that they could be using their bookkeeping software. And this should be also another podcast episode topic, because I really want you to understand why it is that you can't use your software, a spreadsheet or a shoebox to run your law firm. You need to be able to run a report in real time and take a look and see, how is the firm doing, and how am I doing, and what's coming in, what cash can we collect, what cash do we expect to come in soon, are we hitting our goals, not just our revenue goals, but are we hitting our profit goals, how much money can I take home? If you're running it from a spreadsheet, it's very hard to figure out how much money you can take home. You're just guessing. So you have $4,000 in the bank, you say, oh, I'll take home half of it. It's just a guess. And we don't want to be guessing. We want to be very, very thought out, very methodical. We want to do things because we've thought about all the consequences and determined that this is something that we can do. So that is it in a nutshell. So your finance basics for your law firm. Some of this you might be very familiar with, and maybe you picked up a nugget or two that was new for you. So I just want to remind you, if you didn't listen to the last episode, I forgot to mention at the beginning of this episode, we have an upcoming workshop. Over the next few months, we're going to be hosting a series of workshops, and the second workshop in the series is called The Law Firm Cash Solution: How to Stop Living Paycheck to Paycheck, Get Your Life Back, and Only Think About Money Twice a Month. And that training is going to be taking place Tuesday, May 28th at 3 p.m. Eastern. Tuesday, May 28th at 3 p.m. Eastern. Head on over to profitwithlaw.com/workshop, profitwithlaw.com/workshop if you would like to register and reserve a spot in that training. And until next time, I hope that you are prosperous and impactful and able to figure out how to spend time with your loved ones or your passions, or a combination of both, while you are pursuing the firm of your dreams. Take care and have a great day. Have you been enjoying the show? We sure hope so. To make sure you never miss an episode, be sure to hit the subscribe button in your podcast player app. Next week, we will be back with more valuable resources and ideas on how to break the mold and take your law firm to the next level.